Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining our webinar today. I'm Katie Clothier. I'll be your moderator. I'm a product developer at Generation AV, which is an innovation group within Stantec, and we accelerate autonomous vehicle projects and deployments. We're so happy to be partnering with CoMotion today and are looking forward to continuing to work with them in the future. We'll keep this pretty conversational. We want the goal of today to be to hear the different perspectives and visions of where the AV industry currently stands and how we can accelerate deployments in AV readiness. I'll start by introducing our four panelists, and then we can go around and hear a little bit about each person. So if you guys want to introduce who you are, what you do, and how you see AVs in your unique environment now and in the future. We also encourage the audience to ask questions throughout the webinar. You can put them in the Q&A at the bottom, and we'll get to as many as we can. So to introduce, we have Brittany Barrett, who is the Assistant Director of Transportation at Emory University, Grayson Bruelty, the co-founder and president of Bruelty & Company, Marie-France Lauren, the Director of Business Development at Stantec Generation AV, and Joseph Yon, the Transportation Technology Administrator with the Mobility Services Group at Atlanta Regional Commission. Brittany, do you want to start with your introduction?
Sure. So Emory University, for those who don't know, is located in Atlanta. We have a major healthcare system that's also part of our campus. We operate about 52 shuttles and carry about 3 million passengers a year on our transit service. We also operate our own park and ride lots. And then Emory kind of functions almost as its own like city within a city. We have our own water reclamation center, recycling center, and about 50,000 employees total.
So thanks. Grayson, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I'm Grayson Bruelty, and thank you Stantec Generation AV for sponsoring this, and thank you CoMotion for putting together the digital platform. I'm an innovation strategist. I also host the Road to Autonomy podcast with Stantec Generation AV, very kindly sponsor. So thank you for that. And I also host the SAE Tomorrow Today podcast. I look at the future of autonomy is going to come down to brands and experiences and how is everything going to interact. When you look at autonomy will serve a great need of moving individuals around a campus. It'll serve moving individuals around a downtown urban core. But to me, the holy grail is for the robotaxi is how do you build an experience? What can you layer on that in types of commerce to generate the levels of revenue that are going to be required to have a fully sustainable business? And then I also follow very closely the supply side with autonomous trucking, because I believe that's what we're going to need in the future to shore up our supply chains.
Great. Marie-France, you want to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. So Marie-France Lauren, I'm business director of Generation AV. I've been working in the AV industry for the last 6 years. I've been working mainly in Canada on most of the AV deployment that happened here, from the idea to the planning itself and to really making that happen. I really see AV as a life-changing experience and as a way to increase the community approach to the mobility itself. So it's not about having your own vehicle or having your own mode of transportation, but it's about how you can make the entire community better and more efficient, and to really have a way that everyone has accessibility to different mobility options.
Awesome. And Joseph?
Yep, I'm Joseph Yon with the Atlanta Regional Commission. We serve as Metro Atlanta's Metropolitan Planning Organization and Regional Planning Commission combined. My team specifically lives a little bit outside of the infrastructure conversation. The mobility services team focuses primarily on managing travel behavior and demand management for all the congestion and traffic that we have in Metro Atlanta. So I focus specifically on emerging technologies and capturing those emerging technologies to plug into the mobility ecosystem. The more options that we have available for us to move around, the more likely we are to reduce single vehicles, which is our ultimate goal. And that's where our interest in AVs are specifically, is plugging that into the mobility ecosystem, and making sure that it works for all people, and that it is contributing to as a tool and an option for people to move around freely.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. We're excited to hear all of your unique perspectives. Just to start off, how about Grayson? Can you share some of your knowledge on what's going on in California and Florida with AVs right now?
Sure. So California and Florida are two of the states that you see a lot in the news for self-driving vehicles. One state is welcoming of the technology, that's Florida. One state is against the technology, and that's California. And you're seeing a giant migration from California to Miami specifically, not just in self-driving, but also in technology. A lot of that's due to the regulatory environment. In California, you have to file a disengagement report, and a disengagement report is one of the worst metrics ever developed by the California State DMV to put more regulatory, because it creates a false narrative. Well, my vehicle drove X amount of stuff without a disengagement. Well, my vehicle did this. Okay, it starts to game the system to build notoriety. And you've seen a lot of companies that completely stopped testing in California due to that, or they're testing on private land, where in Florida, there are no disengagement reports. You don't have to go through massive regulatory hurdles in order to enable true self-driving. You're seeing companies like Argo AI are operating in Miami in full testing capacity, where they're not operating in California. And it really comes down to leadership at the state level. You in California, you have a governor that is anti-tech for self-driving, and in Florida, you have a governor that is pro-tech. And that's why you're seeing the investment come here, because in order for this technology to mature and achieve its ultimate goal, it has to be tested, and you have to push the technology in safe ways. You have to use tracks, you have to use on-road, you have to use simulation, and you can't go through all the regulatory hurdles for the testing. And then when you get to the commercialization standpoint of that, it cost so much in regulatory fees, and how many politicians you have to pay off, and how many lobbyists that you have to pay to do something, or you're better off going to an environment where you don't have to deal with that headache, where you can create meaningful value for society. And that's the big question you have to ask yourself if you're developing a self-driving car. Do you want to deal with bureaucracy and somebody wants to put you out of business, or do you want to come to a state that wants to put you in business and help you generate meaningful revenue and hire thousands of individuals and create meaningful jobs and help individuals move around cities and move around dense urban environments and move around the state?
Great, thank you. Does anybody else want to have any comments on that?
And I think I just want to add to that, like we're having that conversation about California, we're talking about Miami or Florida in general. I think there's so many other opportunities when it comes down to those AV deployment. So AV deployment doesn't have to be in a big urban city. It could be in a big urban city, but it can also be in communities where public transit is not as developed as it is, and AV could become a good option when we talk about low-speed autonomous vehicle. But when we think of AV in general, it could also be in any other region where it could be harder to get accessibility, let's say to medicine. You can use drones to ship that medicine to the people that don't have a quick access or an easy access to it. So it's really interesting to see that those big regions, California and Florida, are looking to it, but it's not like most of the region everywhere in North America and everywhere in the world are not as populated as those two regions. So it's really important to keep that in mind, that AV solution could be good solutions for all of different regions, not just to those big populated ones.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And that kind of leads into the next question of what do you think it will take for the public to accept or even embrace AVs as a part of their transportation networks?
I can start on that if you want.
Whoever else wants to jump in.
From the experience that I had in the past, I mean, people are always nervous when it comes down to something that is disruptive or something that they don't know about. Once you start to communicate how it works, what it is, like what's the process to get an AV functional, how do you program it? I mean, once you start to really have the conversation with everyone, they are more than interested to know more about it, and they're not nervous about it. the first deployment that I did was back in 2016 in Montreal. And I remember the first lady that came, the first public lady that came into the AV, she was so nervous to know that nobody was driving it. But it took half a second for her to feel comfortable. As soon as the vehicle started going, she totally forgot that it was an AV, and she started talking with the operator, and the operator that was there started explaining to her how it works and what's a GPS, what's a LiDAR, like all of these kind of things that for us is our bread and butter. Like we eat that for breakfast, but for the regular general population, just to get to understand all that, it's just so eye-opening, and they welcome that technology and they want that technology.
And then for Joseph in Atlanta, I mean, that creates the incredible opportunity. You have an incredible young baseball team in the Braves that are going to have this incredible run, and you're going to get fan enthusiasm, and Atlanta has traffic issues. So if you look at Atlanta, you've got this great young team. You know, I'm going to emphasize you're a great young team, and you could go all the way this year because you're a scrappy team. And you say, okay, you can have a now going into a post-COVID environment, you can have an experience that you're going to pick somebody up in Buckhead, or you're going to pick them up in their house, and it could be a Braves branded autonomous vehicle. And perhaps, I don't know, you have, it's a certain thing, and you get Tom Glavine takes a ride with you to the stadium, and you have this whole thing, it's this whole experience, or you'll be able to get a certain t-shirt because you rode in that vehicle. And then when you arrive at the Brave Stadium, you have a dedicated drop-off zone. Oh, this is great. This is all part of the experience. And that's something as tech companies, the Airbnb is opening the big office there. And I've seen the thing trend on Twitter with Techlanta that's going all around. And you have all this great things that are happening in Atlanta. You have great sports teams, and you also have the Hawks, and then you have Coca-Cola, and you have this ability to leverage all these great brands. And then you're the home of Delta to say, okay, Atlanta has all these resources. We have a great regulatory environment for self-driving cars. What can we build on this? It's gonna be really fun to see what those brands do in Atlanta to build that public acceptance.
Yeah, I'm glad you got into that, Grayson. Outside of maybe jinxing the Braves this year, let's not get too far ahead of ourselves with that. There's long season, a lot of baseball to be played, but we'll see. But I think what you're getting to also is something that's near and dear to my heart, is the incentive portion of that. And how we incentivize these trips from a transportation demand management perspective, which is exactly what our team does. And going back to the conversation of regulation, and Georgia's been in that conversation from the state level for a bit, but I think everything's pretty 38,000 foot view right now. The regulation that's in place is pretty high level, just because there's still, we're not sure where the AV market's heading in Georgia. We think we know, but we're also taking a cautious approach to it. And I think that's where, the planning aspect comes in for AVs, is that we don't want this to be a disruptor like scooters, where they just popped up overnight, right? And we weren't ready. We were playing a little bit of catch up on how do you regulate this? How do you manage the technology? Does it belong in a bike lane or the sidewalk? Where do they operate? All these questions that come along after the technology is launched, and you're having to catch to get there. And I think that's a lesson learned for us in government, is to sort of get ahead of that conversation and create the right regulation around that. And we happen to believe that part of the right regulation is not just stick policy to enforce things, but it's also carrots. It's creating incentives and creating an experience where people would want to use and adopt AVs. Personally, I hope that experience is, and the incentives are around shared mobility, that we're creating the right incentives to pull people into actually sharing space rather than car ownership, because I think this gives us the right tools to move in that direction, to where we start moving away from the traditional ownership model and we move more into a sharing economy. But there's a lot to be worked out with that as well.
I think 2 points. One, we're in the position as an institution that Marie-France was talking about. We're nervous. We don't know what it is, and I think the parallel with scooters is exactly accurate. We were caught unaware, and they came, and we just banned them, and then we worked, our way back from that. So we don't want to be in that position again. But we don't want something just for technology's sake. It's got to solve a problem for us. And I think we have resource issues. We have limited parking. We don't have rail access on our campus. We want to incentivize employees to use commute alternatives to reach our campus. So I think this is a great conversation because it can be one of the solutions in our toolkit for the TDM portion of things.
And for those who know me, I'm always repeating the same two things. The first is that mobility is a cocktail of solutions. So we have, as you mentioned, Whitney, have to include all of that in one big plan and not just as single solution that are siloed and add to each other, but it's really how about the synergy between all that. And Joseph, you didn't know, but I quote you in all of the presentation that I do now, talking about your scooter. So I owe you royalty for that. So next time I see you, I'll make sure to cover that. But I mentioned that it's not an if or when, and it's about like knowing what is coming your way to make sure that, like you said, you don't have to deal with that overnight and face the reality of the scooter. But it's really about looking at it as an integrated way. And most of the clients that we have right now at Stantec Generation AV, they're not just looking at deploying an AV tomorrow morning, but they're looking at understanding what it is and what is coming their way. So like you mentioned, Brittany, just like having that kind of notion of information of what it is and how it can be integrated with the rest is the first step. So people should embrace that possibility to just learn from it and not be scared and try to push it back.
Trust comes in. We have to have trust. It has to be trust from the regulator standpoint, the end user standpoint. If you're a city or a university, or you're the public, everybody has to have that trust. And without that trust, it's the glue that's going to hold this together to make it all work. But then the other, Joseph and you and I were speaking about this offline earlier, was that payments. And if we have to, you have to have the trust, but then you have to have a frictionless payment opportunity. So if you want to go from a scooter to an AV to a bus, you have to have one complete payment and not have to take your credit card out every single time. If that rail can be built, then the possibilities for where it goes are endless at that point.
Yeah, Grayson, glad you brought that up. Grayson and I had quite the discussion yesterday of, will autonomous vehicles be single occupancy vehicles? Is it planning for the car 2.0? Or is it, will we have a shared economy with that? And I think Grayson hits the nail on the head with that, is in order to do that. And I saw one of the questions in the chat is, what are incentives to ensure that we are in shared mobility? I think that's a big piece of it. And a little bit of that is, wondering or looking to see how those who are providing the operations of AVs, and whether it be microtransit or any type of first and last mile connector to high frequency fixed route, what did payments look like? What did the operations look like? But no matter what, the concept of things like mobility as a service has to be one of those policies that we're looking at, and bringing in that seamless transfer between the cocktail of solutions that Marie-France mentioned, and that we can pay for those solutions all in one platform. We've got to have that seamless transition to all mobility options in order for the sharing economy and mobility to work. And that includes AVs.
What if you eliminated incentives and outlawed incentives? Would consumers move towards shared? You know this, I'm of the belief, I think it's single occupancy the whole way through. But if you eliminate incentives, they're politically toxic. If you vote for incentive, we're throwing you out of office. Does that change the game?
sorry, I was reading the chat. When throwing incentives out is the question, Grayson?
Yeah, they're politically toxic. You know, you vote for an incentive. Well, we're going to vote you out. Does that change the whole game? Because I think you're going to see a movement, at least here in America, where people are going to be fed up with spending. You know, we got a 1.9 trillion stimulus, and there's another 3 trillion spending, and you're starting to see, you know, Gallup polls and stuff that America's saying enough with the spending, enough with the subsidization and stuff.
Yeah, it's an interesting question when you kind of get into that. I think especially in southern states, even in a place like Metro Atlanta, when we're looking at policies to implement, I think leaning towards the carrot policies are always better than the stick policies. So if you start looking at things like congestion pricing, is that ever going to work in a place like Metro Atlanta? It could, but it's also going to be seen as an additional tax more than likely. So when you start adding incentives to it, even though we're spending from a tax standpoint, it's also not necessarily seen as another tax that we're levying on other people. It's we're creating environments that we are rewarding behavior change, and that's going to be a big thing with AVs. There's going to be a transition period where they are scary. We don't understand the technology. We experience it with public transit right now, to where we have to do our public transit operators, and I'm sure Brittany with Emory is having to do some travel training for people who are wanting to jump on the Emory shuttle for the first time, and having to explain, like, is this for me? Is it, how do I use it? How do I use the shuttle? There's an educational piece that has to go into that. And she can dangle some carrots through Georgia Commute Options and some of the incentives that both of our teams have in place to encourage people to shift over to that, or to carpool and get students out of driving alone. We see it already. It's just, taking that, somewhat copying and pasting it to the AV environment that we think will work. But I think there's going to be some incentive changes that we have to look to in the future as well.
Somebody asked in the chat where, I'm trying to glimpse there a little bit. There's somebody was asking about where is the best location to do AV deployment. Is it like, we talked previously about the city, we talked about a little bit more remote community. I personally, and Brittany, I don't want to put you on the spot there. I personally think that campus are a great way to do that, because as you mentioned previously, it's kind of a city in a city. So you have all of those kind of interaction, and you have the reality of having to deal with parking, with different mode of transportation, but you also have a great crowd of people that are younger most of the time. Like, there's older people like me going back to school, but I mean, it's mostly younger people that are looking at technology, that are interested to see what's coming up, and that are open to that new technology. So if I was to answer that question, I would definitely say that for me, campus are the closest copy paste of the reality that we're facing in the city in general. But maybe you guys differ from that.
No, I think that's, I think a campus is great because it's got all the realities of a city, but it's in a more controlled environment. I mean, I've been looking at other universities and what they've been doing, and it seems like it's an ideal place to pilot something and test it out and work the kinks out of things. And you get that institutional knowledge. And I think it was at The Ohio State, I saw they had, once they implemented, they had students that were trying to mess with the vehicles by walking out in front of it. And their psychology department did a paper on, what would disincentivize students from trying to do that. So there's numerous ways it could go and be beneficial for campuses, and how Emory's campus is, we are, there is main city streets going between different portions of it, and then there are private portions of it I think Emory has been working towards a goal about how they want the space that we have used. And we've made portions of campus just completely inaccessible to vehicles. And while that's great, I mean, that does have implications for how people can move around campus. And so that's why we brought in e-bikes and scooters, but that still doesn't work for everyone. So I think having options like this for where, you know, I've got an uphill short run that I need to move people from a parking deck to campus. I think, you know, this is a great place where an AV could be a solution for us.
On the campus, in college, you have early adopters, and they want to try new things, and you've got the Instagram culture, so they want to put it up there to tell a story. And look what I did. And so I think colleges are great if you can get over the how do you trick this thing? How do you you know, somebody gets drunk and makes a fool out of themselves, which could happen. Not saying your campus could happen at a, let's call it Acme campus, and somebody does something silly or stupid. You've got that issue. And then I think when you look at deployments in Atlanta, you have Tyler Perry Studios there. I mean, that's a large campus. That's a really interesting controlled environment to run it, because you need to move different parts around to move a camera or to move an actor. So that's really interesting. And then one of the most interesting ones, and it's going to be really interesting to see, is now that Cruise has acquired Voyage operating in the villages in a master plan retirement community. And pre-acquisition, Oliver Cameron, who was the founder and CEO of Voyage, had me out there. And we went and we took the vehicles around the villages, and just the genuine enthusiasm. And these individuals are 50, you have to be 55 and older to live there. When can I get this? Can I go to the doctor? Can I go play shuffleboard? Can I go to golf? Can I go to, oh, I need this. I need, like, there's this general enthusiasm of how it would improve their lives. And it's a really great way, because the speed limit is 25 miles an hour. It's a controlled environment. For the most part, it's a respectful environment. And so it's going to be really interesting to see. And then they're also, on the economic side, there's a path to profitability there. They're retired, they have income, either through dividend income or Social Security, or they've been saving throughout their life. They're willing to pay for the ride because they want to experience something. Or if you go into the dense urban environment for deployment, you're going to have a race to zero with no margin expansion. So it's going to be interesting when you factor in the deployment opportunities around the economics.
Yeah, and campus, in general, campus deployments, we're even seeing some economic development opportunities around that Metro Atlanta. We've had some incubators that have popped up, like the Curiosity Lab in Peachtree Corners, that have, you know, set out to try to attract AV companies and a testing facility, and create some technology transfer plans in that, and move that into real world deployments. But their campuses in general do provide opportunities to test things in a little more controlled environment than out in the wild of urban streets and where anything goes, just about, especially in Atlanta.
There's another question. This one's about, should all AVs be EVs? And as far as investing in electric vehicles, knowing that they're expensive but sustainable, what does the ROI look like?
So I'll take it. Should all AVs be EVs on day one? No, it's not going to happen. There's not enough range. There's not enough minerals. There's not enough batteries to go around. I mean, that's the debate that you're seeing play out in the industry now. You have one side of the industry that says we're going to do hybrid, and you have one side of the industry that says we're going to do all EV. And it's a really interesting political battle now. I think it's not about, do you go all electric? Do you go hybrid? Do you go pure internal combustion engine? It's what is going to have the most positive economic impact of where you're going to deploy. It's going to come down to economics. So what's going to make the most financial sense? So if you wanted to deploy, let's say at Emory, and the economics work out where, okay, we can do all EV, we can afford to buy the charging infrastructure, okay, and when we can recoup this either through an endowment or through a donation from a foundation, okay, that makes a lot of sense. But if you're going to run it in a city today, it makes absolutely no sense, because the charging time is too slow, and you're never going to be able to recoup the investment. I think eventually in the future, and I would say 15, maybe 20 years from now, they'll all be electric, but there's going to be that slow uptick. But we're going to have massive breakthroughs on charging technology. And then we're also going to have the grid infrastructure. If you're running in, say, downtown Atlanta, let's just say you've got 50 or 60,000 EVs going around at one time. They all decide to plug in and charge. Can the grid handle it? And then on the back side of that is, if they're all plugged in, do you have that cyber security layer to protect them, or can somebody use that somehow and hack into those vehicles through the grid? And then you've got a massive issue. I think it's all those things that we have to look through, and it's going to be a gradual approach towards electric, in my opinion.
It's interesting. That's actually for Metro Atlanta where we're starting in planning for AVs. Level 5 autonomous vehicles, we see it as a little more of the future and coming down the road. But what we think is more of an immediate need is to plan for, like Grayson said, for electric vehicles and the infrastructure of that. So we're starting the process of engaging with the Georgia Powers of the world, starting to engage with our local government partners and ensuring that there's enough EV charging stations around, and even creating space and place and making those a destination within itself, like parks and things like that, are conversations that we're still at the forefront of, but we are starting to have right now more so than what we're having about, a level 5 fully autonomous vehicle. I think part 2 to that question I read was the connected vehicle infrastructure. And we do think that's going to be a big piece of AVs and even come in that transition phase that Grayson was mentioning, somewhat between electrification, and doesn't necessarily go hand in hand, right? Grayson laid out a point of, or a plan of fully electrification and the process that is going along with that. We also think that may follow a little bit, not cleanly, but there is going to be a process of connected vehicle to autonomous vehicle. And that's where a lot of our focus, at least, real world nuts and bolts of how we're planning right now for AVs, it's more in the connected vehicle space, and making sure that our ITS infrastructure and partnering with GDOT is up to par for connected vehicles and more of an onslaught of connected vehicles before we get to fully AVs.
And that comes from what I was saying earlier, that it's important to understand what is coming our way, so you can plan those infrastructure and really look at what you need to do over the next 5-10 years to be to the level of AV readiness that you're looking for. Because if you don't even look at it and one day you decide, okay, we want to do AV next week or next year, then you have to scratch everything and start, or just add so much element to it to make it AV ready that it's going to cost a lot of dollars. Like, let's put it that way. It's going to be really expensive to do that. So it's better to do like a little bit all the time, and then you have that kind of synergy and all the different approach. We talk about EV and AV. If you already have a charging station that are really installed properly out there when needed, and when you do the AV deployment of it, and it's an electric vehicle and autonomous vehicle, you already have that part take off the list, so you can move forward and have other elements that you're thinking of. So that's why it's very important to have that kind of vision, integrated vision of all the mobility option of what you're bringing. And I saw a lot of questions, and this is something that a lot of people are asking about the security, the safety. There's two things: the safety of the vehicle being driven by a robot or being driven by a software, and then you have the security being, how do we make sure that everything is secure, that people cannot hack the system or come in the system. So the cybersecurity part of it and the risk assessment part of it. I know that we at Stantec, we work with some really, really good partners. Would it be D-Risk? Would it be iCaris? Would it be StreetScope or Poco Lab? We work with Velodyne for the LiDAR technology. Like, we have those kind of partners that are really important to, to the ecosystem, to really bring something to the table. And I think that having a kind of a third party, so when it comes down to low speed autonomous vehicle, they go to the city and they say, yes, we want to do that deployment, or the city goes to them and they say, we want to do a deployment. Having a kind of a third party neutral approach that validate that safety, that security, and that cyber security, you have that kind of level of confidence that can really bring you to another level to make sure that everyone is comfortable with that. I'll give you a really funny example, and I won't name anyone there, but one of the first deployment I did, the minister that was in charge of that asked us, they're like, before we can approve that the AV can be deployed, we need to have all the data that they have collected over the last 20 years to analyze that and get back to you with an approval. So I looked at them, I'm like, I'll see you in 3025, because there's so many like point of data that you just ask for right now. And I don't even know how you're going to calculate that or analyze that. So having all those kind of elements and having a third party that is like in the project and knows about how to do these kind of projects is super helpful.
You bring up a great point with safety validation or cyber validation. So when Brittany meets with the chancellor, we want to deploy Acme autonomous vehicle, and then she can show a complete due diligence report. Or if Joseph wants to, meet with the governor or the mayor, and it's all about building that trust. It says that we're not taking corners, we're going through it. And so in Brittany's case, it's a better example, and then you can go to the board of trustees to get it deployed to test it, because you're starting to eliminate some of the risk for, is this going to work? Is this person telling me the truth when you have it validated? And it completely changes the game. It's going to have a meaningful benefit. It means that the students around her campus, the faculty around her campus, can have that service faster without having to go through months and months of due diligence. And it's building trust. And then when she invites Mr. Law or Mrs. Law Enforcement over, look, here's the playbook of how we're doing this. If there's an issue, this is the head of transportation, this is his cell phone, and it just goes into building trust. And that's going to be the underlining key to all this.
And I think one place to start with all of that too is in the freight side of stuff. I saw, a comment where, and I think even Grayson mentioned that freight is most likely to adopt autonomous before we move to full passenger, right? And we're even seeing that be the case in Metro Atlanta. We're seeing some sidewalk drone delivery pilots going on with Amazon right now. Waymo, I believe, was piloting an autonomous truck from a Google data security center in Metro Atlanta. That was a little more of a controlled environment, but I do think that's a place where we can really start on the cybersecurity front and understanding those data feeds. That's going to be the big thing, I think, in building that trust, is really being able to tap into whatever data is being pulled out of this, understanding how to secure it, understanding how to secure the infrastructure, but also being able to communicate that with elected officials and showing some applications. Scooters is another good example, right? We've seen all of these startups that have come about and pulling the data feeds together from MDS data feeds, and using that in a way that local government can analyze the data in real time and build all these dashboards and stuff. I think there's a place for that with autonomous vehicles as well. And I think there's a security aspect that goes along with some of these companies that are likely going to start up that we haven't even thought about yet, or have even thought that there's a need for yet. But a lot of it's going to be understanding the data feeds that are coming off of that and the infrastructure behind AVs.
But you opened up Pandora's box. So if your data, if you're Acme Autonomy and you're sharing data with a government, there's a budget shortfall. You go back and you retroactively tax them. You're creating issues. So you got the tax loophole there. You've got, I understand the data is anonymized, but it's not too hard to put together anonymized data to figure out what it is. But to me, it's the tax loophole is going to be the big issue, because there's going to be somebody that's going to see, oh wait, we get that's $1 billion company. Let's go retroactively tax them, and then they're gonna leave your state and they're going to go somewhere else, and then you've got a complete mess. And I understand for planning purposes of data sharing, but I don't understand sharing the data with the government, because the government has proven time and time again they can't keep data secure.
Yeah, oh man, that's such a good conversation. And the tax loophole. Look, I haven't even thought about that perspective, which is I want to just have conversations with Grayson every single day, I think, because he brings an angle that I haven't thought about. But the data security, you know, there are some third parties that are in that space right now and kind of advocating for data security, but good data sharing between operators in technologies that are already deployed, like scooters. The Open Mobility Foundation is a good example of someone who's in that space of really standardizing data that's coming off of micromobility data feeds, but then creating security and advocating for security around that. And there's this balance, right, of like we do need to make sure that data is secure and strong when we're sharing it with local government. But by the same token, we've got to figure out how to share it with local government, especially if we're in a shared mobility environment, because there has to be regulation on how you manage that. Even with drone delivery right now, how do we manage the curb space is a growing conversation. And the only way that we know how to do that well is with data feeds that are coming off of that and standardizing. I'll shoot it back to you.
So the standard that you mentioned was created for pure political purposes of a pure political agenda. It's about putting a political agenda in place, not about doing good by cities. When you look at, you say you have to share data. Well, I don't tell the government how many miles I drove. I don't tell the government what type of gasoline I put in my car. I don't tell the government where I charge. I don't say, hey, hi, Mr. Government, I parked here. And then you invoke privacy, the privacy issue. And you're going to get Tim Cook or somebody with a very loud microphone is going to bang that privacy thing. The Apple Car, when it shows up, Project Titan, you want to call it Apple Car, we do not track you. We will not share your data. That's going to completely turn this upside down on its head, because they've got a multi-trillion-dollar marketing machine and probably arguably one of the most recognized brands in the world.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, from a planning standpoint, we know in general, VMT, vehicle miles traveled, from a high level, right? We don't get down to the individual level of Grayson traveled, 3,000 miles in California over a 6-month period. By no means would any government, from a planning standpoint, want information like that. But a very high level of data that is put together on a high level scale does help for planning efforts. It helps us make investments into infrastructure, and it helps regulate the operations in any type of shared mobility. And I think that's going to be the security issue, Grayson, is going to be a growing conversation. It's already happening in the micromobility space. There's a lot of good conversations that are going on right now. Even some court cases with LA recently that has come out, and I think we're on the other side of that now. But the conversation there is evolving, and I think it's something that we definitely have to keep our hand on and make sure we are securing data, and we're not getting down to individual data by any means. It's all for investment purposes and infrastructure and regulation and operations, excuse me.
It does good, but what if you gave the consumer, like Apple's going to do it, gave you the choice to be tracked or not to be tracked? Even Google, of all people, is going to stop tracking movements. And so you have a little pop-up. Do you want to be tracked, yes or no? And I think you'd see an overwhelming people that would say, no,
for sure.
I don't want to be tracked.
For sure. Yeah, and I mean, that's, I don't have the right answer to that. It's something that we have to do with our own application like, yeah, you can opt out of that. And it's, I think as long as we in general know, movement population and our movement data rather, so that we can make sound investments. That's what we're after. We don't want individual data. We don't want to get into the ultra privacy conversation, because it does put us at risk for cybersecurity issues that we just don't want to get too into the weeds with that.
Grayson, we can go back to your point about co-branding and marketing. And if I agree to be tracked, then I get coupons for stores that I've gone by and incentives for hopping into places. I see you're going past here. So it could work both ways. People might be into it.
You're right about that. Once we put augmented reality in the windshields in fully autonomous vehicles, so you're going to Starbucks, and it could say, well, you were there 2 days ago. Would you like to go again and get $1 off? So yes, that's totally going to happen, but it's going to be opt-in, and then that will help generate, and then the provider will take a transaction cut, and that will help subsidize the ride and help them generate. So you're totally right.
We had a question similar to that. Somebody was asking how like non-tech companies and non-AV operators could be involved in the AV industry.
Payments.
Yeah.
Marie-France, go.
Charging. Charging.
Yeah.
What about having a charging station? Like I mentioned previously, the Swift Mile charging station, but it's a agnostic charging station that can charge all the type of EV, electric scooter, electric bikes, but it also has a charging station for robot delivery. And you can also install on it a LiDAR. So you can have a company like Velodyne that comes in and install the LiDAR on the structure. So that brings the price down for the infrastructure that is needed to do all that. But it also provides, again, we come back to that cocktail of solutions. So you have that charging station that provides the parking, a safe parking, chargeable location for the electric scooter and the electric bike. And you have the AV ready technology that is installed on that. So it's that's how you need to think of it. So it's not just like AV, like the low speed autonomous vehicle that you see on the road. It's everything that goes around it that can makes it, or it can be tweaked to be AV ready.
That's great. I do have a question for Brittany next. Somebody asked, when thinking of your TDM plan, do you include movements of goods and on-campus delivery?
Yes, actually, thank you for somebody asking that. I had mentioned about moving people, but we also move things all around campus. We have a whole materials handling issue. I think Joseph started to touch on with the curb management. We have 52 shuttles, but we have over 400 other kinds of vehicles on campus that are moving around goods. And there is, the freight aspect, but then there's also this last mile aspect of just moving things right around our campus and how we could use help from managing our resources. We're doing all this research right now, and how many vehicles per person and shifts, and can we match these things up and getting goods from point A to point B, just within the borders of our campus. So yeah, I think that we definitely are looking at that, and that's actually where we started with the transition to electric vehicles, was on that side of things. And we're going back and doing our due diligence to look at the regular shuttle fleet as well. So the curb management portion of things and reducing the amount of people or vehicles that are coming onto campus and needing that space is an aspect of this that's appealing, where the technology could help be a solution to a problem that we have.
And we see it too in the world in general. There's a lot of people looking at AV solution for good movement. Why? Because you don't have anyone on board, so it takes away that kind of nervous feeling that you can have of like getting people on the vehicle, so you can kind of test it and have a little bit more reassurance. I mean, I got my 3 and 5-year-old kids in an AV back in 2017, and I was not scared, but that's me being me. But if you get like everyone that you talk to, having a box in there for them is the best way to test that technology and to make sure that you can have that kind of synergy and that kind of integration to the plan that you have. So movement of goods are definitely something that is moving a little bit faster than people mover right now at this point.
For Brittany, if for you, it becomes really interesting at the university, where if you have a FedEx or UPS and you create some sort of digital layer over that curb, and you can charge, listen, we'll give you the primo drop spot. We're not going to have the ticket maid come and give you a ticket. You pay us $2 and you can have X amount of time, your 15 minutes, and it's guaranteed for you. That becomes really interesting. And then it helps, you can use that money to fund more scholarships, to do improvements, to add stuff into the lab. So that becomes really interesting. And then from the delivery standpoint, you're making it frictionless. Okay, no more having to circle around, no more having to worry about that, the ticket maid coming. And then it's simple. They just put like a little transponder in the vehicle. And so you already know, okay, boop, boop, doo, doo.
You don't
And
have
it becomes really interesting.
You don't even have to do that. You just need the LPR technology that reads the license plate, and everything is charged back to you afterwards. Come on, Grayson, detector, no.
That's why I need you to help me.
Enforcement officers don't like writing tickets anyways. Grace, I love how you're always finding a way for us to make money on this. This is fantastic.
It's all about the economics.
Yeah.
Another question we have is, I know, Grayson, you mentioned freight being ahead earlier. Someone asked, do you expect shuttles, personally owned vehicles, or other vehicles to be the majority of AVs in 5 years?
Trucks, and trucks.
Shuttles.
There's no doubt about it. You'll have more
Shuttles.
trucks on the road of any other vehicle. You saw Too Simple, big milestone. They're going public on the NASDAQ, the first autonomous vehicle company to go public. That's trucking. You're seeing Embark and Kodiak are doing really great things in trucking. We're seeing Locomation doing really great things in trucking. And the reason why I'm talking about trucking and then Daimler has Torque is that they operate massive fleets. These are thousands of trucks. And when you start multiplying that and you look at it from a global perspective, it's not just running freight in America. They're going to run freight in Germany. They're going to run freight. One of the largest markets for freight is Australia running, and there, and Volvo is doing a lot of testing. So it's going to 100% be autonomous trucks by far.
I want to think that shuttle will be important in there, because from the operating standpoint and from the public transit authority, I think that we need to review the way that things are being done and to add a little bit more flexibility to the solution that are being out there. I mean, and again, Joseph, like, don't jump at me there, but the traditional planned route with a stop there every 15 minutes, like it's not even 2020, it's 1920. I mean, we need to get past that, and we need to have that kind of technology that will help. And if it's not, it doesn't have to be AV specifically, but I mean, AV will help to bring that on-demand side of thing and to have that kind of flexibility. There's nothing that makes me bite my nails more than seeing the 54 passenger bus from my local operator going on the street there with nobody in it, or with 2 people. There's nothing worse for me than that. So we really need to kind of view the way that technology will be integrated to the public transit opportunities. And I truly think that shuttles should help facilitate the connector between where people live and the main stop that you want to create. So that way you'll have less big buses going in smaller street, and you'll really just bring everyone to the main hubs where you'll be able to have multiple solutions, but also like a better traffic and less congestion in the street. So I want to think.
Yeah, Marie-France, I think that, to your point, I think COVID has been somewhat of a silver lining, and that for transit operators as well. Now is the opportunity, right? So many routes have been taken away during COVID to scale down the operations to service what the populations that absolutely need it for frontline workers and for those who are still depending on it to move around. But that has brought a conversation up for a lot of transit operators. What do we bring back online? And how do we, now that we've taken some of these routes away, how do we balance that that balance between coverage and frequency.
Yeah.
And in a place like Atlanta, where we're sprawled and you're having to serve a large geographical area with public transit, it's a good opportunity to look at that. And a lot of our operators are looking at that and saying, all right, how do we make sure we're investing more in frequency and not bringing back the full coverage in this sprawled environment, but what do we do to supplement that if we don't bring it back? And consistently, what we have been hearing is microtransit is the option for that. We have, fortunately, in the metro area, have seen a few local governments run some pilots. We are in a right now to implement microtransit for a nonprofit social service in Eastern DeKalb County that is in the process right now. So there's a lot of growing interest in microtransit, along with seeing a lot of the startups in microtransit fundraise during COVID and seed additional money, shows that there is a willingness to put investments behind that. And I do think it's one of the technologies, because everything is on demand. It's already on a smartphone. You're calling it, you're hailing it like you would a TNC. You're just moving that over to like a small van or a van or a smaller bus. It's one of the areas where AV shuttles can make a big impact on. You probably can expand the fleet a little more, and it can serve as a good first and last mile connector. I do think that trucks are going to be the biggest dominant on the road at first, but I think we have an opportunity to really expand AV technology for passengers and shuttle first. And I think that is where microtransit solutions really can come in and adopting AV technologies and some of the Ollie shuttles out there.
I'll give it to Grayson for one good reason, because they have a hard time to recruit drivers for those trucks. So if they want to keep the trucking industry going the way it's going, they'll need to find technology to do that. So I'll give this one to Grayson.
So yes, we do have a driver shortage, and I saw a question from Javier about railroads. Railroads are only going to complement autonomous trucking. Railroads make on average 40% margin. I'll go out on a limb and I'm going to say you'll probably see a railroad acquire autonomous trucking startup sometime in the future. It's going to happen because they're going to connect where the railroad ends. They'll go in the autonomous truck. The big benefits to autonomous trucking is not necessarily the economics that you're going to see from how much money the trucking company can make. It's that during a pandemic or during a shortage, we can shore up the supply chain. We can get you your toilet paper. We can get you your Clorox wipes. And when you remove those costs of your traditional thing, it'll lower the cost. So for your toilet paper, will be $1 less for a 12-pack. Well, that's game changing for a family. Or that cost of food that you're getting from that farm will be cheaper and be completely game changing, because the cost will be passed down to the end consumer, and then it's going to put more money in your wallet. So perhaps you can send your child to a better school, or you can save for a vacation. That's the real meaningful aspect of it. And to touch on Joseph's thing on the cities, it's going to be really magical when you have this microtransit on an on-demand app. And if there's like say for example, a single mother that's living in an area that's not served by transit, and she can go on that app and go get a better job because she can get there. That changes the game. This is all about doing good by society, because when we do good by society, everybody wins.
Yeah. And then I saw a question earlier, Grayson, that sort of gets into that equity piece of AVs. And I'm glad you brought that up, because there are quite a number of transit deserts in Metro Atlanta where we have seen a growth of suburban poverty due to things like gentrification. How do you service those areas? And we're looking at microtransit right now, but AV solutions can be a good solution. And going back to the shared mobility conversation of that, it does provide more of an equitable environment for all residents. And I know we get into the equity of technology with that, but that is I think one of the equity pieces that are advancing a little more than things like mobility. Everybody has access to a smartphone. You may not have access to data plans or something like that. But you know, the technology advancements are more equitable right now than transportation is in general. I do want to point out that Grayson made 2 bold predictions today. One is that a railroad will acquire an AV trucking company, and the other was that the Braves will win the World Series. Was that accurate? I'm going to hold you to both of those.
Yeah, if that happens, Joseph, we'll all be in Atlanta to celebrate with you.
Awesome. Great conversation today, guys. We're at time. Thank you everyone who entered questions. If we didn't get to your question, feel free to reach out to any of us. We love talking about AVs. And thank you to CoMotion for hosting this. And then just one more thing to mention is D-Risk, one of our Gen AV partners, will be having a CoMotion webinar later this week. So make sure you guys check that out too. And thanks. Have a great day, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.